Bozeman, we have a choice. Do you think you know the full story behind Bozeman's short-term rental debate? Let's unpack this whole controversy and why it affects all of us. First and foremost, when discussing anything in Bozeman's housing situation, it's very important to understand our housing market as a whole. Bozeman's charm is, of course, undeniable, but I'm sure you're aware that does not come with a cheap price tag. Over recent years, Bozeman home prices have seen a ton of appreciation, and this consistent demand for homes in Bozeman has been driven by several factors like job growth, lifestyle changes, and of course, an influx of new residents. On the other hand, the actual supply, the number of homes available to the market, has not been able to keep up the pace. And when demand outstrips supply, like it has for over the last decade, the home prices have inevitably soared. And while many potential solutions are being debated right now, it's clear that merely addressing the price is not going to be enough. We're going to need to have comprehensive strategies that will tackle both ends of this issue, increasing the supply while also ensuring affordability. This is going to be easier said than done. It is evident that the housing situation here in Bozeman is very complex. Now, there's one aspect of our market in particular that's been making waves as of late, and many of those waves are a positive ripple for the community as a whole. Even though some would disagree, but I'll get to that here in a minute, what I'm talking about here is short-term rentals. So to get a clear picture, let's first demystify all of the different types of short-term rentals as they're defined by the city. So there's three main categories. The first, type 1, entails renting out one or more bedrooms in a dwelling where the owner resides throughout the whole rental period. Type 2, where there's a few different scenarios that can vary a bit, but first is renting out an owner-occupied home where the owner is not present during the rental period. Second of type 2 is a short-term rental of an accessory dwelling unit, also known as an ADU, whether or not the ADU's owner is present in the primary dwelling during the rental period at all. And lastly, for type 2 of 3 would be renting out a unit in a duplex, again, regardless of the owner's presence in the other unit. And finally, there's type 3, which is what everybody thinks of, which is you're just renting out a property regardless of if you're there or not, or even in town. Now, with knowing the three different types, let's dive into the numbers of Bozeman's short-term rental situation specifically. And side note, all of the sources that I'm using to make this video are in a link down in the description. And if any of this is helpful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as there's going to be a ton more to cover here as Bozeman continues to inevitably grow. Nevertheless, as of today, Bozeman has 22,500 homes total. Of those, 263 are registered as STRs, and a recent study that was presented to the city on August 8th stated that there might be right around 305 STRs that are unregistered, which means that all of the STRs tally up to only about 2.5% of our total housing stock, which you could then reduce to only 2% if you exclude all of the type 1s. But I digress. So now if we take all those 568 short-term rentals and we count the bedrooms in them, there's 1,852 available rooms for short-term rental in Bozeman that's not a hotel. But then if we go down that rabbit hole and we look at the hotels in the community, there's a total of 2,447 rooms available to rent via hotel. Consequently, there's 4,299 rooms available for short-term stay in all of Bozeman. And now we have to wonder, why is any of that even relevant? Well, Bozeman, as we know, is a hotbed for tourists no matter the time of year. And STRs have become a very integral part of their experience while they're here in town. Also note that every one of these visitors staying at an STR is supporting our local cafes, shopping in our boutiques, and even hiring local tour guides to make the most of their experience. And for many years, I was actually one of those guides. Now, if we look at a study that was done in 2019 by the Institute of Tourism and Recreation Research at the University of Montana, They highlighted that non-resident spending in Gallatin County was around $1 billion. Yes, a billion, like with a B. Now, this is not just a number. It's a testament to the out-of-state dollars that boost our community as a whole. Not only do the tourists create the opportunities here, but the properties that they're staying in create opportunities as well. STRs are supported by people like property managers, cleaners, one of which is my wife, landscapers, and all other sorts of vendors that are involved in the upkeep of the property to be looking good in the neighborhood and the community, which means that several more local jobs are created for every single STR. So in the grand scheme of Bozeman's housing discussion, while addressing affordability and availability is important, we should not overlook the multifaceted contributions of STRs. They're definitely a whole lot more to our community than just an overnight place to crash, but they're actually a lifeblood to our community as a whole. There's a growing contingent in Bozeman spearheaded by a group called Bozeman Tenants United. And what they advocate for is actually reining in or even an outright ban on these types of rentals. So if we dive a bit deeper into where that specific group and viewpoint in general on this issue is standing, here's what it is. They claim that STRs are contributing to not only the housing shortage, but even the high cost of homes here by potentially reducing the number of properties available for a long-term rental or to purchase. They argue that STRs drive up costs and decrease accessibilities for local residents. And as I continue here, something that I think rings true no matter where you stand on this issue is something that I said to the commissioners at the last meeting about this on August 8th, which was this. In evaluating policies, it is vital to consider how they contribute to the thriving of our entire community. During this meeting, you'll hear differing perspectives, some rooted in facts, studies, and personal experiences, and others driven by anecdotes that lack substantive data. And from my point of view, during the recent meeting there on the 8th, stories of hardship and emotions were the entire foundation of the opposing side's arguments. Even right after the study that the city paid to have done made it very clear that it would do next to nothing to make a direct impact on Bozeman's housing affordability. Well, it is crucial to not only acknowledge, but also empathize with individual stories of hardship. Stories will actually be made stronger by the data, not contradict it as a whole. And policy decisions must be grounded in comprehensive data to ensure the best outcomes for everyone. So now, with all of that being said, if we look at the average price point that STR properties tend to be in, it's very unlikely that anyone who can't afford the lower price properties as of today would be able to afford one of the STRs even if it was made into a long-term rental. There wasn't actually any factual evidence from the opposing side that banning or restricting STRs would have a net positive impact on the community as a whole. Again, while it's essential to address these concerns head on, it's equally crucial to approach the conversation with the entirety of Bozeman's housing landscape in mind. So rather than focusing solely on STRs, as I touched on earlier, they do play an integral part to our local economy and provide jobs for families. Let's now pivot to a perspective that's often overlooked during these passionate debates: the repercussions of a blanket ban or further restrictions on STRs. By doing either of those, we will inadvertently create a ripple that harms the community as a whole, and specifically the impoverished in Bozeman in ways that we hadn't anticipated, which means we're hurting the very people that we want to help with these ban or restriction policies. So firstly, let's consider the immediate economic impact. The revenue generated by tourists every year is around $1 billion. When tourists come and stay here, they have 4,299 rooms to choose from, as I spoke about earlier. 43% of those are STRs. If we set a ban, that will go down to only 2,447 rooms available, or only 57% of what it is at now. That means that going back to supply and demand, that hotel rooms are going to get significantly more expensive because the demand is going to go up for them, which in turn is going to discourage people from traveling here to Bozeman altogether or just going somewhere that's cheaper. Or maybe even when they do come here, they're going to be spending less money for sure at our restaurants, shops, and other things. Which means that the $1 billion that they're bringing to the community will be a lot smaller number, and that's going to have a major negative impact on our community for everybody. Second, the city already has restrictions in place with the types of STRs and a permitting process. And by their own admission, it's estimated that over half of the short-term rentals here are already unregistered. I don't see how putting more restrictions or a ban on them is going to work. Since the demand is here, Bozeman would just create a black market for STRs, where regulation for safety and other things would get thrown out the window by property owners, which will lead to unintended consequences and a net negative impact on our community. Relate this to the alcohol prohibition back in the 20s and 30s. That didn't work now, did it? Plus, if they can't get more than what they think is over 50% to register as of today, how are they going to magically enforce these all of a sudden? And where are they going to get the funds to start enforcing them from? Third, another important aspect to consider is the assumption that STRs, if they're restricted or banned, that these properties will actually become a long-term, let alone affordable housing option. On average, the assessed value of a short-term rental here is 49% higher than a value of a property that's not an STR. So even if somehow we did have a subsidized version of STRs into long-term rentals, it would not be cheap, and it also would likely not be a permanent option. The city would have to go back and renegotiate every single year as leases start to turn over. And in that time, the property could decide to sell or even move back in. And that's also assuming that the property isn't going to just sit vacant, like for somebody like a snowbird, if they're going to Florida or Arizona or somewhere else. The city is also going to need to account for things like inflation, costs of property maintenance, and all of that's going to continue to increase. They're also going to need to monitor all of this, which means more of yours and mine taxpayer dollars to go and support this. All of that is going to be a very logistical headache. So the idea that curbing STRs would instantly yield a surge in affordable housing to have an effect on rental rates or home prices is at best speculative. Now, fourth, as an American, it's essential to look at the foundational tenets of our society, one of which is property rights. The U.S. Constitution, through the 5th and 14th Amendments, guarantees rights to private property. By placing restrictive regulations or an outright ban on STRs, we tread a very thin line with these constitutional guarantees. Homeowners, by all rights, should have the freedom to decide the best use of their property, whether it's for a long-term rental, short-term rental, private residency, or anything else that they see fit. Furthermore, historical precedence tells us that property rights are not just about economic value. They're also about personal freedom, autonomy, and the very essence of liberty. Restricting the rights of homeowners will surely set a precedence that goes beyond STRs and right into other policies surrounding freedom, both locally and nationally. The more power you give to a government, the more they're going to reach for. Now, obviously, this is going to be a very strong comparison because we're not to this point, but I do not want us to get here, and that's why this is a line to hold. Back in 1946, one of the first things that North Korea did was take farmland from the people for the collective welfare. Fast forward to today, and it's a modern-day Holocaust with murder, oppression, and starvation that nobody wants to talk about. Well, it's important to ensure community harmony and housing availability for everybody on what I'll call the collective welfare. It's equally crucial that we do not compromise constitutional rights that underpin our society here in America. And since when did we let the government tell us who we can invite into our home and for how long? Fifth, there are so many stories of why people personally need a short-term rental. And I'm going to save the most touching example for last. But as we know, Bozeman is surrounded by agricultural communities with people who don't have the resources that we do. So when people travel here for medical purposes, there's many instances where people cannot be in a populated place like a hotel, and they rely on a short-term rental to be able to be safe while they're staying here. Another lady that I know, she's retired and doesn't have any other sort of income other than her STR. This allows her to be able to stay in Bozeman with her family while also having something to do for staying active as she gets to make friends with the people who happily rent from her. And one of the most touching stories is actually a friend of mine. I have a friend whose son has special needs. And when they're not around anymore, it's very likely that their son is going to need to move in with his brother because Bozeman does not have any good housing options for people with special needs. And the STR income that they're making will go directly to supporting his caretaking brother. Those are just 3 quick examples of how STRs are absolutely needed for people personally. And I'll guarantee there are a whole lot more stories that are out there like that. Sixth, another consequential aspect of a ban or restrictions is the impact that it will have on development and investment, i.e., the things that are going to bring more doors to our community, solving our supply and demand issues. These individuals and entities are driven by market demand and potential returns. They play a pivotal role in shaping Bozeman's landscape and the future of our growth here. There's already a lot of uncertainty in today's housing market as it stands, and by banning or restricting STRs, it's going to create even more. When developers and investors don't have a clear and consistent expectation about the potential uses of their projects, it becomes a lot riskier for them to commit capital. And that's just speaking into the future. There's already a lot of that has already happened, and we'd be stripping that capital away from them if we were to move forward with this. So an environment of unpredictable regulations is not one that they or anybody wants to ever see. This will create hesitancy that will slow down housing development and projects, meaning there's fewer housing options for Bozeman residents, continuing with our current supply and demand issue, again, hurting the very people we're aiming to help with these policies. The consequences of curbing or banning STRs clearly has deep, multifaceted ramifications that will affect more than just the housing market. No matter which side of this issue that you stand on, there's one thing I believe everybody can agree on. That is the fact that housing is very expensive here, and we have to work hard and be innovative to make it more attainable and affordable for everybody in the community. Now, call me crazy, but I also believe that it's going to directly come from people helping people at the bottom up, not from the top down with governmental bureaucracy and restrictive policies. With that being said, I actually do want to commend the people who are passionate about this on the opposing side of the issue, and specifically the Bozeman Tenants United. You clearly understand the need for affordable housing here. You've done a great job of getting lots of people not only to show up, but be fired up at your gatherings. With that being said, given all of the evidence and data that I've laid out here, I would hate to see all of that time, energy, and resources go towards fighting for something that is only going to hurt the people you want to help. It's going to be crucial to have a dialogue about this together rather than behind closed doors meetings with groups just picking sides. And I'll be one of the first ones on my side to put my information out there to have conversations with anyone about this topic. We all want the same thing, which is housing affordability and opportunities for everybody. Let's come to the table with open minds and open doors to discuss the best path forward. And in fact, Bozeman already has a lot of other things that they're talking about for helping with this issue. So instead of focusing solely on STRs, which isn't going to help with the macro issue, I'd like to propose some alternative solutions with housing affordability, both on a macro and a micro, more personal level. First, for the macro, and I can't say it enough, it all comes down to one thing: supply and demand. If nobody wanted to live here and everybody was fleeing Bozeman to live in another city, the issue would be the complete opposite. So let's consider how we can be incentivizing development to create more housing units here. Even expand our infrastructure to the surrounding areas rather than keeping it all in the same place. I don't see any reason that the demand for Bozeman proper is going to change unless you can flatten the surrounding mountain ranges and move our airport to Havre. And that's never going to happen. But we need to continue to incentivize development to expand our community. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, how does that affect me directly? So now for the micro level on a more personal note. And actually thinking about this, soon enough here, I'm going to make a separate video on strategies that you can use to make it more affordable here in Bozeman. But I have these types of conversations every single day with people as a real estate agent. So I'll throw some ideas out there for both renters and home buyers to chew on. And if you have any questions on your specific situation, feel free to reach out. Our Constitution enshrines the right to property and a fundamental cornerstone of our nation. However, it's vital to understand that while everyone should have access to fair and equitable housing opportunities, the location and specifics will be influenced by market dynamics. Balancing individual rights with community needs is a delicate task, and it raises an essential question: how do we ensure housing affordability while protecting individual rights? This is a conversation we must have together, focusing on the broader picture and long-term sustainability. So, in understanding the broader implications of what banning or restricting STRs could look like, I urge our community members here in Bozeman to come together and make collaborative and informed decisions. If you resonate with the points I've presented here, I encourage you to please fill out the Google form in the description of this video. As soon as it's done, we will email you a petition opposing further restrictions on short-term rentals. And if you don't see the Google form, that means the petition's done and I've already replaced it with that link. Bozeman, your voice matters. And by staying informed and taking action, we can ensure a bright and balanced future for everyone here. As we ponder the future of the housing landscape, let's remember the importance of maintaining a balanced and informed perspective. Our choices today will shape the community for many generations to come. Please comment down below what you may agree or disagree with. As I said, there has to be dialogue from people on both sides so we can get to a solution. Also, hit that subscribe button down below so you can stay up to date on all things with real estate here in Bozeman.